Greetings and blessings to all our viewers and listeners. And unfortunately, I was not well for about 10 days, close to 2 weeks, so we couldn't make any new shiurim. Baruch Hashem, Baruch in His mercy helped me, and I feel much better, thank God. Those are the people that inquired and were interested in the health situation. I thank them very, very much. It was a very big chizuk. It strengthened me. The inquiries and the worries, we thank them very, very much. We're holding before Shabbos Hagadol. This Shabbos is Shabbos Hagadol, and of course, Shabbos Hagadol is one of the most fascinating topics insofar as Yetzias Mitzrayim is concerned, but also from a pure halachic point of view, as the question arose by all the commentators. The Shulchan Aruch in Tov Lamed in Orach Chaim states Shabbos Shelifnei Pesach, Shabbos that precedes the Chag of Pesach. There's coming Shabbos, the Shabbos Hagadol that precedes Pesach, which will be on Thursday. Shabbos Hagadol. We call it, we give it a type of appellation in nomenclature that it's called the Shabbos Hagadol. That's the entire halacha. The Mechaber, also in Tov Lamed, cites this part of the tour without going further and says Shabbos, Lefnei Pesach, the Shabbos that precedes Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol, nothing more than that. The tam, why it's called Shabbos Hagadol, so the tour does bring this down, but the Mechaber, of course, does not bring down time and reasons for the halachas. So the tam of Shenase by Nes Godol, it was a great ness. If it would not be classified, categorized as a nes godol, that which happened on Yud, the Nisan, which happened to be Shabbos, just like this year, the original Yetzias Mitzrayim was on Thursday. That was Tes Vav B'Nisan, and the great ness that took place was on Yud Nisan, and of course that happened to be Shabbos. It coincided with Shabbos. So it was a Nes Godol that took place. Pesach Mitzrayim, insofar as Pesach Mitzrayim is concerned, there's many halachas that the Mishnah in Pesachim brings down that are not noyeg, do not apply for Pesach Doros. The special halachas that govern Pesach Mitzrayim that simply do not apply to Pesach Doros. Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Isel beis avos v'sel aboyos." Pesach sheyotzu Yisrael miMitzrayim oy b'yom Chamishi, as we mentioned a moment ago. I think it says in the Seder, it was on Thursday, the Nimtza. So therefore, the result is Shasar b'chodesh hoyo Shabbos. V'lo kolem kol echad seh l'pischoi v'kosher osoi b'karei mitosoi. What happened was that on the 10th day of Nisan, which happened to be on Shabbos, it coincided with Shabbos, so Klal Yisrael were commanded by Moshe Rabbeinu that everyone, all the males, everybody has to disperse in Mitzrayim and go to merchants that sell sheep, cattle, etc., and purchase on Shabbos a sheep for the Korban Pesach, for the Paschal lamb offering, which will take place in another 5 days on Tes Vov. Truthfully, it took place, the Shechita was on Yud Daled, which was 4 days hence, right? Yud was the Lekicha, was the purchase, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, those were 4 days. And in the afternoon of the 4th day, which was the afternoon of the 15th day of Nisan, so the Shechita of Pesach took place. So this is what took place on Shabbos Hagadol. Klal Yisrael, at that time, consisted numerically much more than Shishim Riboy, but at least insofar as our conception is concerned, there were 600,000 Jews, male Jews, who went dispersed in all of Mitzrayim searching for a lamb to be makriv 4 days hence. And there was an unbelievable nest that took place, a nest Hagadol. We don't see that term applied too often. And the nest Hagadol simply was when the Mitzrayim asked, why are you purchasing this? Be'eshivam l'shochtoi l'shem Pesach b'mitzvahs Hashem aleinu. The reason we're doing this is we're buying this not for personal consumption, but to slaughter l'shem Pesach b'mitzvahs Hashem. It should have a Shem carbon. It should be a sign, a shame, a name of a carbon Pesach. And the reason we're doing it is exclusively to fulfill the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'yishineim keyos, each one of the Egyptian merchants that did sell carbon Pesach, they set for carbon Pesach to the Jewish people, at that point wanted to kill, wanted to murder the Jew. We'll soon see why. And they became paralyzed. Like the Mefarshim say, even though it says Shineim Keyos, so to speak, they almost had their teeth shattered, but that's to be understood metaphorically. They became simply paralyzed and they could not commit mass murder. What would motivate them to commit mass murder and manslaughter? So the Torah says, very simple. We'll soon see in the Rambam and Meir Nevuchim and Guide for the Perplexed that the Sev was the deity of the Egyptian people. And they became impotent. They could not do anything, even though the Klal Yisrael were in Golus and the Egyptians had tremendous strength. They became impotent, couldn't do a thing, and this was one of the great miracles of all time, obviously. It was called the Nes Gadol, and that's what we call Shabbos before Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol. That is exactly what the Torah says. The Mechaber does not bring down the time, as we mentioned a moment ago. He simply says, Shabbos Shalifnei Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol. For the Shulchan Aruch, just to state what we call, what's the appellation of this Shabbos, is very strange, because after all, the Shulchan Aruch is a code of laws. It tells us what we're mandated to do, activities that we're obligated to engage into these activities, and which activities to disengage and abstain from. Here, there's absolutely no chiyuv, there's no obligation to do anything. The entire Mechaber exhausts itself with one halacha. There's a special siman, Tov Lamed 430 in Orach Chaim, that says the Shabbos Shalifnei Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol. Very difficult to understand. The Ramah already brings down something which is Lemaisa, which is in actuality, that we read the Haggadah, Avodah Mayinu, right? We don't complete the reading of the Haggadah, and also we stop saying Baruch Nafshi. The Goin disagreed with the Ramon, said you don't read the Haggadah except Bisman Shepesach Matzah Mar Munachim Lefanecha. So according to the Goin, you also don't read the Haggadah. What's left? Stop to say Baruch Nafshi. Very difficult to understand why this would warrant a special designation of Shabbos Hagadol, which l'chura means something great, outstanding. Difficult to understand. So this question was asked by everyone. The Chidah, Kol HaTorah Kula, he had knowledge, vast Torah knowledge that just about no one had in his generation. Close to 200 years ago, Niggler V'Nisler says that we have no right to add anything to the Mechaber. It's a halacha l'maisa. What is the halacha l'maisa? Just as we translate the words in front of us. Shabbos Shelifnei Pesach Keigenoisei Shabbos Hagadol. We call it Shabbos Hagadol. That is the halacha. Of course, the Shulchan Aruch will only bring down halacha l'maisa, something which we have to do. So therefore, it says the Chidah that we are all obligated when we mention Shabbos to say Shabbos Hagadol. When does that actually take place? And you wish somebody good Shabbos. So you continue and you say good Shabbos Hagadol. Shabbat Shalom Gadol. Good Shabbos Hagadol. That is what the Chidah says, and this was more or less accepted by everyone who came after it. Very fascinating, but we don't have another teretz that was accepted by a majority of the great person. But of course, the question naturally arises. And the Prisha, the Drisha, Chidushei Hagoyes all ask the simple question. Mashaloi kavu yom ha'asiri l'chodesh yehei b'Shabbos b'choyol k'mo shekavu kol ha'regalim l'mispar ha'chodesh ve'medak yom yom b'Shabbos b'choyol. So the question is that we know that all the holidays except for Shavuos, all the holidays are linked up not with the day of the week, but with the day of the month. Pesach is Tes Vav B'Nisan. Sukkot is Tes Vav B'Tishrei. Pesach Tes Vav B'Nisan and Sukkot Tes Vav B'Tishrei. Makes no difference if it falls out, it coincides with Shabbos or a weekday. It's immaterial. The day of the week is not connected with the Kfiyas HaMoyed, with the establishment of the holiday. We also have that by Purim and Chanukah, the Kislev, Yudalet Tesvav Odor. Insofar as Purim is concerned, and absolutely no practical difference the day of the week. So this took place on Yud B'Nisan. So we would have expected that Yud B'Nisan, the 10th day of Nisan, should be called Yom Hagadol, a great day, because there was a great miracle. If it happens to fall out on Shabbos, perhaps we would say Yom Shabbos Hagadol, and that would be only to show our respect for Shabbos. But why do we say that it's called Shabbos Hagadol and the Kfiyos, the establishment of Shabbos Hagadol on the Shabbos right before Pesach, and that could be Yud Aleph Nisan. Sunday would be Pesach, and Shabbos would be the Shabbos that precedes Pesach. Very difficult to understand. And this is the question that everyone asks, and there's many, many answers for this. We should like to say a different answer, and I believe this answer is more b'derech hapshat hapashat, more of a simple answer. We'll just mention what the Bach says. The Bach says that the real reason is that they wanted to establish Shabbos Hagadol on the 10th of Nisan. However, if they would have done that, so it would have obscured another great event that took place, and that great event on that day, She'ola ben Hayarden, that the Klal Yisrael ascended from the Jordan, just like we have Kriyas Yamsuf. The Yamsuf split, and it became Yabosha, dried land for the Jewish people to go through the Red Sea. The splitting of the Red Sea we're all familiar with. So also the Jordan River split, and the Jewish people went through. So it's a second edition of Kriyas Yamsuf. So that took place on Yud Nisan. So therefore, if we would have called Shabbos Hagadol the Shabbos that precedes Pesach, and we would attach it, ascribe it, link it up with Yud Nisan, so it would obscure in our thinking the greatness of B'kiyas Hayard and the splitting of the Jordan River. That's what the Bach says. Others say it happens to be the day that Miriam and Neviah was Nistalik, so it's a Tainas Sadikim. So we didn't want to make a memorial to a great event on a day which is unfortunately a very sad event. These are the answers that the Poskim and the Torah bring down. But it would appear that the answer would be a simple answer. And of course, to answer this question, first we should just by way of introduction, to mention the Beis Yosef. So the Beis Yosef asked a simple question. If this is called by the Chazal a Nes Gadol, a tremendousness, greatness, noble, outstanding. And the reason is because the Egyptians were paralyzed, despite the fact that they had a very, very strong feeling to revenge the scorning of their Avodah Zarah, the humiliation that an ordinary person would have, that perhaps it would not necessarily express itself in revenge that would be murder or manslaughter, but nevertheless we understand why it will be naturally aroused the feeling of revenge for the humiliation and the scorning of your Yetch, of your Avodah Zarah, of your God that you believe in. So why not tomorrow? Why the next day? The day after, they must have been paralyzed, as the Beis Yosef, for 4 days. True, at the time that they bought the sheep, so the merchants became paralyzed. They couldn't do anything, despite the fact that they had a burning desire to kill the Jewish people. What about tomorrow, the day after? So the Beis Yosef says that this ness of having frozen Egyptians, paralyzed, could not do a thing, they couldn't even open their mouths. That's what it means, Shenem Chaos, the Rashayim, Bleimerleim, Dova, they could not say a word. That was the paralysis that every single Egyptian was overcome with. So the Beis Yosef answers, that's true. It was for 4 days till Shchitas HaPesach, and that afterwards was the night that started the Geula, the redemption of the Jewish people. They exited Mitzrayim then, and theoretically it should be called Yomim Gedolim. Should be Kulam Nasa Nes, because the Nes wasn't all of them. Answer is that the essential Nes, about Chalta at the very, very beginning, and that was the Iker paralysis. But afterwards, after the first day, so the drama and the novelty of having so many Egyptians walking around paralyzed, not being able to do anything, as far as inflicting harm and injury to the Jewish people, so that novelty was lost. It only existed at the first day. That's what the Beis Yosef answers. So we see here a real remarkableness. And the question, of course, is, why is it not linked up with the date of the month? We mentioned a moment ago, Shavuos is different because Shavuos does not have a firm fixed date in the Torah. It depends on the 50th day after the second day of Pesach. And the commentators, the Rishonim, the Chinuch explains because Shavuos was the time of giving of the Torah, and the reason the Torah did not make that as a separate, independent holiday in the Gimel Regalim and have its own fixed date for the observance is in order to emphasize and stress that the entire Yetzias Mitzrayim followed a purpose. It pursued a very, very lofty purpose, and that was Matan Torah. And the Chinuch says very sharply, if it wouldn't be for Matan Torah on the 50th day subsequent to Yetzias Mitzrayim, there would never be the Yetzias Mitzrayim. That was the very purpose, the destiny of Yetzias Mitzrayim was Matan Torah. Therefore, Matan Torah does not have a fixed date. Very beautiful tenets. So now we have to ask ourselves the same question as we asked a moment ago, and we should just like to add another question. And that, of course, is along the same lines as this question. That's the question of the Sifsei Chachomim on the Rashi that is brought down on the din of Mishmeres. We'll see this inside for one moment. So from the Torah, it would appear that the reason that Pesach Mitzrayim different than Pesach Deiris is because it says Mishmeres ad arbo yomim. In other words, until the 14th day of the month. And afterwards, the Shachadur say called Kaladas Yisrael Bein Ramayim. So we never encountered Mishmeres. What does Mishmeres mean? So Rashi says, Zeloshon Bikur, Sheton Bikur, Mimum, Arbo Yomim, Koidem Shchita. So this is a Bikur Mimum. We cannot sacrifice any carbon kavua to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if it was not examined 4 days in a row before the actual sacrifice. That's the halacha of Bikur HaKarbon, examination, strict examination to make sure there is no defect in the carbon. Otherwise, it will be disqualified from being a sacrifice. So therefore, we need Bikur. So of course, this is a distinction between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Doimus. You don't have to purchase it 4 days in order to examine it. So the Briskerov already pointed out that of course you need Bikur L'Doimus. Can't be Makriv, a Balmum. However, the Bikur does not have to be in the hands of the Bala Carbon. You don't have to purchase it 4 days in advance, and you yourself, the Bala Carbon, the owner of the carbon, must examine it to make sure there's no movement there. It's a din. The din of Bikur is a din in the hefts of the carbon, in the objective carbon. So if we have a Moishe, Yisrael, we have a merchant who sells sheep, he's a Neman, he's an Ish that has credibility, he has a Cheskas Kashrus, and he vows that this particular sheep he examined 4 days straight, and it does not have a mum, so the owner can rely on the Bikur that was done by the merchant himself. So the question is, if the din Bikur L'Doiris is a din in the heft of the carbon and the object of the carbon, you don't have to do it, even though you're the Bala carbon. The carbon has to be mevukar, the carbon has to be an animal that was examined that doesn't have any defects. So why is Pesach Mitzrayim different? And that is the question that Masya ben Charash addresses, that Rashi brings down so beautifully. So the question is, very good question. We'll soon see the question on the question. Right? Why by Pesach Mitzrayim did the purchase, the Maisa Lekicha, precede the Shechita 4 days? Mashallah Tziva came with Pesach Deiros. So Ramasya ben Chorash Yoimer, Hagi Yoimer, Vevo Layich. He brings down the Psukim in Yecheskel. I passed by you, Ve'erech, and what did I see? This is a time of love. HaKadosh Baruch Hu expressed love for the Jewish people. It's time that there should be an element of togetherness, like between man and wife. This was the beginning of the Ishus, the intimate relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. The time for the fulfillment of the promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avraham has now come to the proper time. However, the Jewish people did not have mitzvahs that they should occupy themselves in order that they should deserve the redemption. Shenemal, because the pasuk says in Yecheskel vat Aaron the area, you were totally uncovered. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them 2 mitzvahs, Dam Pesach v'Dam Milah. Shemalu bo'isay alayla. Shnemal mispeiseses b'domayich b'shnei domim. So he gave him 2 mitzvahs, mispeiseses b'domayich. The Jewish people were wallowing in blood, the blood of Dam Pesach, of the Korban Pesach, which of course they had a smear on the lintel and the doorpost, as well as the Dam of Milah, Shemalu bo'isay alayla. That's also a question because you can't have Milah at nighttime. And number 2, the Shechita was during the day, so they were Orel. They were not circumcised, and Orel can't slaughter a Korban Pesach. These are questions, halachic questions, which we will not address ourselves in this shir. Briskerov speaks about this, Ba'arichos. So we'll leave that, but just the point is that Masih ben Choresh said a reason why the Kichas Pesach only in Pesach Mitzrayim preceded Shchitas Pesach 4 days, because they had to have 2 mitzvahs, the Hisasek Bohem, Kidei Sheyigalu, that was Dam Pesach, and Dam Milah, the blood of circumcision. So of course, the Sister Chachamim say this makes no sense whatsoever. What was the question? Why was it necessary for every male Jew to purchase the Korban Pesach 4 days in advance? So the answer is because Klal Yisrael needed mitzvahs in order to be redeemed, and they didn't have mitzvahs. Bat Aaron Barrier, they're uncovered. They need mitzvahs to cover them. So if the question would have been, why or how were the Jewish people meritorious and they did have some sort of source of merit to be redeemed, so we would have answered because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them 2 mitzvahs. So these 2 mitzvahs are the reason why they were redeemed, but it's not the reason why they had to purchase the Korban Pesach 4 days in advance. If they would not have purchased it 4 days in advance, somehow or other, there would have been a possibility of having a bikur, correct, of a Jew. He would have asked a guy, let me just, right, you could say by you, I just want to examine certain payments, perhaps he would let him do it. That's not the issue that Rashi is addressing himself to. He's explaining why the Jewish people needed these 2 mitzvahs. That's the question. So it's a very difficult question. Right? He doesn't answer the question. Why? That could have been theoretically possible in different Eifan. So we should like to answer these 2 questions with one answer, but beforehand, we have to try to understand, right, what exactly it means, Va'at Eiron Ve'er. And this, of course, is what they call Makshim Ha'olam, because we know something remarkable about the Jewish people, and Maran the Chazon Ish also became, so to speak, involved in trying to solve the stira. We'll soon see, because we have a very, very famous medrash, that appears in Shir HaShirim, and also it appears in Shmoyis Rabbah. And the medrash states on the pasuk, "Shoshana bein ha'chaychim, kachayosi bein ha'bonos." Just like you have a rose that grows very, very nicely among thorns. So likewise, the Jewish people grew, developed, matured among the thorns. That is the symbol of the Egyptian people. And that's what we say in the Hagadol. Vayishom l'goy gadol. What does l'goy gadol mean? Vayishom. There, the Zohar points out, was African Mitzrayim. They grew to be a great nation. What does that mean? So the Ritva on the Hagadol, the Shibai Leket on the Hagadol, bring down the famous Medrash, that the Medrash states that b'schus Dalit Dvarim, Klal Yisrael were Zoicha Tegula, b'schus Arbot Dvarim Nigalo Yisrael Mitzrayim, and that was Shloishinu Shemam, Loishinu Lishoinam, Loihoshinu. Now you'd go through Mina Arayas. And the Chazal say that these are the four things which Klal Yisrael were Zoicha to the Gula. For four merits, the Bnei Yisrael were delivered from Egypt. They didn't change their names. They did not change their language. They did not inform one against the other. And there was not one act of immorality. There was only one act of immorality. For hundreds of years, in Erev Ha'aretz, the Torah calls Egypt the most depraved, debauched place possible on the face of the earth. There was only one case of immorality, one woman of loose morals among all the millions of the Jewish people, and the Torah publicized her name. It was published, her name, to tell us not her disgrace, but the greatness of the Jewish people. So they didn't change their names, they didn't change their language, they didn't speak Lashon Hara, and they were moral people. For hundreds of years in the worst place, they maintained their morality, and this is what the Rishonim say. That's the meaning by Yishom, the Goy Gadol, also Baroiv Goy Gadol, Kesheshana ben Achaychim, Kachayosi ben Abonos. Klal Yisrael grew to its highest level of morality, Dafka in Egypt, because they saw what debauchery, how disgraceful it is, and sometimes when you come in contact with evil, so as a counter reaction, on the contrary, you become moral, and you see how disgusting, repulsive immorality is. So that is where we're holding. This is a contradiction. So this was asked to Yitzchak Isaac Sher in recent times, by Shiva Slobodka, Chazon Ish. So there were a number of reasons that were given. We'll just mention one or two. That the Shach al Torah, the Chazon Ish held of this sefer, was a Talmud of the Riyah Kodesh. So he says the answer is that the Arba Dvarim were insufficient. Why were they insufficient? Because they're all Shevi al Taisa. They all involve disengagement, like all the Tariq mitzvahs. It's not to do something. Mashiach came, which is not the case, like Dam Pesach and Dam Milo, which is active, it's mitzvah saseh. So they needed mitzvah saseh in order to ultimately have a slus, a merit for the redemption. And there's other answers as well. None of the answers are that compelling. First of all, the way we understand it, we understand that mitzvahs lo saseh are much greater than mitzvahs saseh, and that's what Rashi told us. The fulfillment of negative precepts is greater than the performance of positive precepts. Rashi is Lamites in Kedushin, says Rashi, there's no mitzvah more than that. Because what's the case that we're talking about? We have a possibility of doing an Aveira and you abstain. So there's no mitzvah saseh that is more than that, and you'll get the greatest reward, says Rashi, for that abstention of not doing the Aveira when you had a possibility to do it than doing any mitzvah. So we see mitzvahs like saseh, chayvus halavavis. It's an inner performance. It's an act of recoil. It's an act of negating a potential pleasure that has a magnetic, hypnotic effect on the individual, more than a mitzvah saseh. So Rashi says, lo saseh is more. I'm sure that immorality in Mitzrayim was such an overwhelming trial and tribulation that if Klal Yisrael could prevent themselves from that, ein l'cha mitzvah gedola misu. So it's difficult to understand what the contradiction is. It would appear that the contradiction could be resolved in simple terms. These are terms that more or less we grew up with in America. It's more or less a type of American understanding of what the Jewish people are. These four attributes are outstanding, no question about it. And without these four, the Jewish people could not have been redeemed. It's b'schus arbot dvar. They needed these arbot dvar. But what is the common denominator between these four great, outstanding attributes of the Jewish people? This gave them the Jewish identity. Vayishom l'goy gadol otzam v'royev. They were distinguished in Mitzrayim. Everybody saw that they were traditional. They maintained their traditional behavior. They were outstanding. You could see that it was the Jewish people. There was no major difference between them in Mitzrayim as it was insofar as the way they appeared, the way they acted before they came to Mitzrayim. This is Jewish identity. If we ask ourselves a question, you had people that came from Italy to America. You had Frenchmen that came, Englishmen. They came from all over the world, so they became Americanized. The American culture seeped in to their daily behavior and their daily demeanor. We don't exactly know what the culture of Italy, France happened to be, but we know that in America is a melting pot, and everybody becomes assimilated and they become Americanized. They have the values of America, they have the culture of America. They lost their values and they lost their culture. Not the Jewish people. The Jewish people are distinguished and distinct. And what gives them the Jewish identity of Avaisenu HaKadoshim are these four attributes. Like the Chazal tell us. The Chazal tell us this clear as the day. No one changed his name to Rufus. It was called Ruvain. No one changed his name to Julius. It was called Yehuda. And the Chazal are marich. They speak about this at great length. So we're not going to go through the entire medrash, but this is the gist of the medrash. But they came as Reuven, they left as Reuven, not Rufus. They came as Yosef and not Listus. They came as Benjamin and not Alexander. They kept their language, which has nuances of Judaism. Yiddishkeit, what they call it, Judaism. God forbid one Jew should not harm another Jew by the power of speech. Speech can be very harmful and injurious. And more than anything, the women's morality, the men's morality, for hundreds of years, no act of immorality. This gave them a Jewish identity. Had they not had this Jewish identity, they could not have been redeemed, even with the two mitzvahs that were given to them. So the Dalet Dvarim happened to be Dalet Dvarim for Jewish identity, Jewish tradition, Jewish demeanor. And afterwards, practicing this for hundreds of years, at this point, they still were uncovered. We'll see what that means in a moment. Not Erev Ver. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them two mitzvahs. Damila v'dam Pesach k'dei sheyigalu, and it's published in the words, in order they should have the actual redemption. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not have seen their great powers of control, the self-discipline in the negative mitzvahs, so there would be nothing to redeem. Redemption comes only to people of the Jewish identity, the Jewish traditional identity. So at this point, we can understand exactly what transpired in Mitzrayim. We can understand it a little bit better. First question was, why is this linked up with Shabbos Hagadol, more than all the other regalim, except for Shavuos, included, of course, are the holidays of Hanukkah and Purim. Reason is that it was Shabbos that caused the sakana, that brought about the danger, and it was Shabbos that brought about the salvation. And we shall explain. The Torah brings down, the Torah Tov Reish Pei Aleph. Reish Pei Aleph, the Torah, Shulchan Aruch, son of the Rosh, brings down the Perushim of the Shabbos Tefillah. So what is the Perush of Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko? So the Torah says, Perush, Yismach Moshe, K'shoyu avoseinu b'Mitzrayim, v'ro Moshe kovet hashibut shechbidu aleim. Moshe saw the affliction, the misery, and the pain and suffering of the difficulty of the shibud. Bikesh miparoi she'ite lehem yom echad b'shavua she'yanuchu. Yes, one day during the week they should have a rest. V'nosna loya, Paro granted it to Moshe Rabbeinu. U'bochar b'yom hashvi, so his own selection, Moshe Rabbeinu selected the seventh day, Shabbos. Even in antiquity, there was a concept of a week. Starts with a Sunday, ends the seventh day. And then they start again, first day, second day, third day. And when it came out that the Yom HaMenucha by Matan Torah was Shabbos, so Samach Moshe was happy, deliriously happy, Shebachar, boy. And that's what it means. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelka. Moshe should be very happy that the day that he selected coincided with the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu designated to be a Yom Menucha for the Jewish people. That is one medrash that the Torah brings down. Afterwards, the Torah brings down a very fascinating chazal. And that medrash states that the Jews in Mitzrayim had in their hands Megillas, in which they delighted themselves from Shabbos to Shabbos. Both Botek Nesiyos and Botek Midrashos. So we think that Botek Nesiyos, synagogues, Botek Midrashos is something new. No, they added the Mitzrayim too. There were houses that were designated to be houses of worship and houses of learning. And they were inhabited on the seventh day, that they had a day of rest, that Paro agreed, consented to Moshe's request, and these Botei Knesses, Botei Midrashos were full of Jews on that day. And they read Megillas. We don't know which Megillas they read, but they read the Megillas that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would redeem them because they rested on Shabbos. Because they designated the day of Shabbos, so Shabbos will be the ultimate, even though there was no tzivur, there was no commandment. But since they took the day of Shabbos, and the day of Shabbos was a day in which the Jewish people celebrated, they had a Oinik Shabbos by gathering and reading these Megillas, and these Megillas, says the Torah, told them that for sure there's going to be a redemption. Maybe it was Parshas of Bereshit. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu will ultimately, inevitably fulfill his promise. So this is what the Jewish people did on Shabbos. And of course, we know that in recent times, Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky pointed out that Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, Tov Loides Hashem L'Zamel. So Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky tried to prove that this was also one of the Megillas that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote for them that they should say, because this speaks about a wicked person that has it good and the righteous person that has it bad. So it's very relevant to that time and was mechazik them in the Emunah. It's only temporary and ultimately it'll change. So they went out on Shabbos, a day that was set aside for Avodas Hashem, for Ruchnius, for Tfilis, chizik in the faith of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and just to say it metaphorically, it's like Hasidim, it's just metaphorical, today would leave their base medrash, they would go home, take money, and they would go to the marketplace and make a purchase. Very strange. So what is the import of this phenomenon? What does this scene indicate? That had it been on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that they bought a sheep, and the owner would say, the merchant would say, no, what are you going to do with it? So they would say, we're going to shecht it l'shem Hashem. So they would not be believed. They would think the merchants, the Egyptian merchants, that the Jews are teasing them. They're being afflicted, so they're teasing them as a way of getting back at them, perhaps. It would not have been an act of seriousness. They would not have looked at it as an act of resolve on the part of the Jewish people. However, if it took place on Shabbos, and there was a musik, there was a concept, a fundamental concept, that Shabbos is not a day you go to the marketplace. It's a day that you go to Botei Knesiyos and Botei Midrashos. And if on that day, as it were, metaphorically, they profaned it, and they said that we're going out now with a special commandment that we heard from Moshe Rabbeinu to buy a sheep in order to slaughter the sheep. So that encounter was met by the Egyptians with a seriousness, because they saw the Jewish people were very serious about this. Because had it not been a serious undertaking on the part of the Jewish people, they would not have done so on Shabbos. So we see that Shabbos was not incidental, was not coincidental to the sakana, to the danger that it brought for the Jewish people, but it was the geirim, it was the cause of the danger that the Jewish people were mortally in danger. Insofar as Pesach, Sukkot is concerned, it was incidental. Yetzias Mitzrayim could have taken place Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It took place on Thursday. Thursday had no positive cause in Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Exodus could have been any other day. It had to be on a day. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said it'll be on Thursday, but not that Thursday is poyol in the Yom Tov of Pesach. Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim could have taken place any day. It was totally settled. Insofar as Shabbos Hagadol is concerned, this greatness that took place on Shabbos Hagadol, so Shabbos was responsible for it. Because it was Shabbos, so the Egyptian merchants saw that the Jewish people were serious and they were going to totally demolish, destroy their deity, and this was an act of supreme Mesiras Nefesh. No one thought the Jewish people are suicidal. And that's why I'd been during the week, the Egyptian merchants would have ascribed this to be some sort of teasing, not serious. And it was Shabbos that brought about the miracle. It was Shabbos that was maybe es asakona, and it was Shabbos that was maybe es atzola. Shabbos was responsible. There was a geirem to bring the danger, and it was B'Svus Shabbos, like the Medrash says, because Shabbos was set aside as a spiritual day, you will be zeicha to the gula. There's what to talk about. You'll have a gula. So we see that that's why it's ascribed to Shabbos. It's a Shabbos did. And that's what the Torah says. Nes shenaseh boy in Shabbos. So now we can understand something very remarkable. Did Reb Masya ben Chorosh answer his question? Did he not answer his question? He asked, what was the reason why Pesach Mitzrayim, you had to have the purchase 4 days before the actual Shkita? He answered the question beautifully. Of course the Jewish people had a Jewish identity. And of course, they were worthy of a redemption. But when Masya ben Chorish quotes the pasuk about Aaron Ve'eryom, so there was one aspect that was missing. They were uncovered only in one aspect. They were real Jews before Matan Torah. Their Jewishness was real, traditional, under the most difficult of circumstances. They had a real Jewish identity that unfortunately by many people here in Eretz Yisrael is missing, unfortunately, but not happy that they're Jews. They don't want to demonstrate, display the Jewish identity, a tragedy that we never encountered before. However, there was one thing that was missing, and that was Mesiras Nefesh for Mitzvah Hashem. So, for Pesach Doiris, the purchase of a carbon is only a vehicle for the mitzvah of slaughtering it and the mitzvah of eating it. It's a hechetimtza. It's no more than that. There's no need to do an act of purchasing 4 days in advance. However, Pesach Mitzrayim, it was necessary. It was not external to the Dinei Pesach. That's why the Mishnah calls it Pesach Mitzrayim. Korban Pesach Mitzrayim. Mikray Brasa. There's a din, Midinei Pesach, a din in Pesach Mitzrayim that you have to purchase it 4 days in advance. So why? Why is that necessary? So Ramasya Mecharish answered beautifully. Because the Klal Yisrael had to demonstrate ultimate heroism, ultimate gevura, ultimate Mesiras Nefesh. They're going to risk their lives. But it's more than a risk. It's a high risk. In all probability, they'll be killed and murdered. They're still willing to do it. The Jewish people were aware. Hey Nizbecho, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, shall we slaughter sheep, cattle in Mitzrayim? They'll kill us. So Paro retorted, no, I'll give you the army. I'll give you the police. You'll have protection. So Moshe Rabbeinu said it won't help, and Paro was masking. Because it's inhuman. It's impossible for a human being to see his Avodah Zarah, his deity, defiled, degraded, destroyed in front of his eyes without responding. It's impossible. They'll kill us. After all, they have the ability and capacity to do so. So this was the greatness of the Jewish people. So therefore, it relates to Shabbos. It's a din in Shabbos. It's Shabbos Hagadol. Al Shem, the Nes of Shabbos Hagadol.